switched over, and it says right here. See? So if you go to his Facebook page now, you should be able to see Paranormal Encyclopedia, and I'll share it as well.
You guys realize this makes basically a month.
Yeah.
This is our 5th episode.
It's awesome.
What would have been hilarious is if this was the 7th.
That would have been ironic.
Or the 11th. Because the second game's the 11th hour.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But him being our 7th guest
Yeah,
would have been hilarious.
So you're not taking any other calls right now, right?
Unless somebody calls in. Did somebody call in?
No, I'm just saying because I don't want to block his call, and I don't
Yeah.
want to keep the number up there unless you're ready to take calls.
No, at the moment, let's just get started.
People will start calling.
You good to go?
We'll have a segment where we.
Yeah, I'm ready. I'm ready to put you on now. I'm just getting this set up. Yep.
I came up with a little.
And then what I do is I usually when I watch it,
Okay.
Just when you introduce me, I can.
and then we'll
It
listen to
won't
it.
take long. It was just
No, it's fine.
something I thought up.
Fantastic.
All right, I'm gonna get you started.
Okay.
You guys are ready, right?
Yeah, we're ready to go.
All right, here we go. So here on the software, what I do is I hit stop, and I hit the mic on, and I hit record,
Thriller dance.
and I go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're on.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 5th episode of Paranormal Encyclopedia. We've officially been at this a month now. I'm super excited about that. We've got a very cool guest that I've been trying to get for a while. John Johnson. He is the creator of an upcoming TV show called The 7th Guest. It's based on the classic 90s era CD-ROM game. But of course, let me introduce my usual gang of misfits. All should know by now, Brian McKinley.
Hi. These, of course, are my books, who are my guests here. Drawing Dead and the Ancient Blood series. Please buy them. They're wonderful books. They're all bound in human flesh and inked in blood. And
Completely true.
handmade by Norwegian circus elves. So they're really something special.
As you buy enough of them, the next editions are going to be bound or made by demons and elves.
Yes.
I set him up with a guy.
I can afford demons if we sell enough. So they make great Christmas gifts.
Now I'm just thinking of the demon blood sword from Adventure Time. It's like, hey, we can use their blood to make a sword.
And of course, you should also know my fiance and our sidekick, Amisha.
Hi.
Say hi to the camera.
Hi.
So, also before we bring in our guests, I did want to mention, if you go to hamiltonradio.net, we now have a chat room that is live, and you can interact with me directly during the show and ask questions, as well as calling in or asking on Facebook. At this point, why don't we bring in our caller, or guest, I should say.
He's there.
John, you there?
Yes, sir. I'm here. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure to have you. We were just saying, it's a little bit of a pity that this is our 5th show instead of our 7th show.
That's right. That's right. Or if you really knew the game, I could be the 6th guest.
Yes.
This is true. You're just one shy of the 6th. But okay, so let's get this thing going. What drew you to doing The 7th Guest as a TV series?
Well, I did a feature film called Plan 9, which is a remake of Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Oh, that was
Wow.
you?
And
Oh, I love that.
oh, well, good. I'm glad. I had just made that movie, and everyone kept asking me, what are you doing next? What are you doing next? And I didn't know. And so I went to get some inspiration from a bottle. And a few drinks in, I started looking up stuff from my past to try to get inspiration. And I was a huge fan of the 7th Guest video games. 7th Guest, the 11th Hour, from 1991 and 1993, I think, or 94. And I found that they had a Kickstarter that they were doing to try to get a 3rd game made. And it didn't happen. And then they tried again to make a smaller game, and then that didn't happen, sadly. So I didn't know what they were doing, so I was a little drunk, and I wrote them a letter saying, "Hey, I'm the Plan 9 guy, and what if instead of a third game, we made the sequel a movie or television series?" And a couple days went by. I almost forgot that I had written the fan letter. And the owner of the series wrote me back and said, "Are you serious?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah, I make a lot of movies, and this would be kind of fun to do." And we got to talking, and he took a look at Plan 9, and it all just kind of came to be. We decided at the time whether it was going to be a series or a movie, but since we wanted to get more character-oriented versus, the explosions and kind of wrap up the story very quickly, we thought it would do best as a series.
Nice.
Okay, so why don't I could do it myself, but you're the guest and this TV show is your project. So why don't you start for the people out there who don't know, explaining the basic idea of the Seventh Guest? First is a TV series, and then of course please talk about the TV show.
And yeah, because when that came out, I was like 2 and 4.
Yeah. It's very Faustian. The original game takes place in the 30s, where 6 guests are invited to a toy maker's home, and they're all kind of given offers through puzzles and games that they have to decipher, because we love puzzles, games, and toys, that they can all get the thing of their dreams if they go a little bit dark. And so they're all tempted, and each one makes different decisions. For Stoff, Henry Stoff, who is the toy maker and the Faustian character, which South and Faust are the same letters.
It took me until playing the second game to realize that, which is depressing given I'm a demonologist. It came out in 1991, and it was the first video game to use live actors inside of the actual game. So it was kind of groundbreaking as well. The game that became a little bit more popular that came out right after it was called Myst.
Yeah, I remember that one too.
Yeah, rather famous.
But yeah, it was Seventh Guest was kind of the first game to do it. And then the sequel takes place in the 90s, many years later, where a news reporter goes missing and another news reporter goes to find him and is led back to the Stoff mansion.
Yeah, but I have played both. So let's talk about your series and where it fits into the mythology.
Well, we are officially canon. So we take place in 2014 after the events of part of the game, Seventh Guest in the 11th Hour. But we also kind of sum up the storyline completely, so you could just watch the series without having to play the game. But if you had played the games, you'll catch a lot more references and get more in depth of what's actually happening in our story. And it's kind of a re-envisioning of Stoff's original game, where he invites 7 new guests to a specific location and starts to tempt them. And whether or not they take that deal, you have to find out, I guess.
Well, yeah, we don't want to spoil everything. It's
Sure.
So is this a limited run series, like a one season kind of thing, or is it planned where it could go open ended?
It's left open ended. There are 10 episodes in the first season. I think each one's about 25 to 30 minutes long. And it could end with that, but it's pretty open-ended that we're hoping to get a second season. We're not locked into a second season yet. We have to see how the first season does.
Sure. Okay, cool.
We can hope that you get the second season, because, again, it's like, wait, you're turning one of my favorite video games of all time into a TV series. And you got the original Stoff, as I understand it, did you not?
Yes. Robert Herjavec does voice for it. He's not in it as a live actor.
Mm-hmm.
But his voice carries throughout the entire series, and the voice of Stoff, just like you would hear in the games, is very apparent throughout the whole show.
Oh, nice.
I noticed because I watched the trailer that you have up, and when his voice comes in, and it's like 20 years, his voice hasn't changed. It's still clearly stuff.
Oh, he's a master. The guy just picked up right where he left off 20 years ago, and it was just amazing and awesome to get him again. We also got the music rights from the original composer, so the themes of the games are a part of the show. So that was another big super plus for us. So it was kind of like getting this band back together from 20 years ago to kind of add another end to the story. Also, they kind of put it in my hands to answer some of the questions that the games had left behind that people always wanted to know the answers to, and we try to answer them in the series.
Which is good, because there's a whole bunch of points. I mean, even going through the game and like hunting and solving every puzzle and trying to catch things in the sort of sequential order, there are definitely gaps there.
Oh, sure, yeah.
So where's the series going to be on, and is there anybody like attached to it that we might recognize?
Well, the series is not sold yet, but I would say at bare minimum it'll be on Amazon Prime. But I don't know which distribution company we're going to end up with.
Okay.
The pilot launches in January at a bunch of screenings at conventions and stuff like that. And then by summer, I think we go to market.
Cool.
Notable names, there was a Fox Kids show called Galador that came on in the 2000s, used to come on against Power Rangers. Well, Matthew Ewald, Galador himself, is one of the guests, as well as on the YouTube world, Meg Turney from SourceFed and Rooster Teeth, as well as James Rolfe, best known as the Angry Video Game Nerd.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised. It's not just that James Rolfe, but that his friend Doug didn't get in on it.
Oh, I don't know. We James and I have done about 3 movies together so far.
Oh, nice.
We kind of get along really well. He's also in Plan 9.
Oh.
And he actually wasn't too familiar with the game when I brought him on board. Just because PC wasn't he was more of a Nintendo guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was like, when I first saw he's going to be in it, I went to his channel. It's like, surely he's done a playthrough or something, or a review or something of the game. I couldn't find anything.
No, he wasn't familiar with it, and he will be now.
I would hope so. Of course, I have to admit I'm a little jealous. It's like, dang it.
Maybe they can get you in on the second season. Maybe you can be a guest star.
You got demonologist. I'm just saying. I noticed with the series you're doing, at least in the trailer, it seemed like you're doing that. It's a paranormal investigator kicking things off.
One of the characters is. One of the 7 guests, they all come from different walks of life.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is a paranormal investigator who actually doesn't believe in the paranormal and just travels to debunk any kind of claim. And
she's
put it over his head.
Oh, that's always entertaining when they realize, no, it's all real. My whole worldview is shattered before me.
And yeah, as an investigator, it's like, I've seen people have that experience of, wait, it isn't real, but it's happening, but it isn't real.
Right.
It's
That's always
extremely
a fun
entertaining.
position to write for.
So you two had questions, I know, from the TV end. I'm trying to think. This is the problem with not making notes.
Yeah, well, could start off with the obvious of it. Any advice that you give to people to want to go into film production, TV production?
Well, it's a very different world these days. For one, this is probably one of the only series that's directed, every episode is directed by the same person. Usually there's a showrunner and then different directors per episode.
Yeah, that
where
is unusual.
I actually took on the whole thing itself, which is a bit insane. And now I realize why they don't do that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a work of passion. So I'm glad I did
Nice.
at the end of the day. But it's definitely a new medium where there's more call for content today than there was like 5, 10, 20 years ago.
Nice.
Because there's so many online services that are looking for content. It's kind of a great time to do it. And then anybody who's got a cell phone now has editing software, a camera, audio gear. It's kind of an amazing time, and there's a lot of competition, but there's also a lot more avenues to get your work seen. So the best advice I can give is just do it.
So how did you get started in all of this?
I made my first film in 1988 called Zap, which was there was a TV show called V that I was obsessed with.
I loved V. That was like my favorite show growing up.
Oh, sure, same here. And
Yeah.
I had some laser tag guns and a VHS camera, and so I made my short film.
Nice.
And then I made my first feature when I was 15 years old in 1995. And then I just kept making movie after movie after movie, and I'm at about 172 right now.
Really?
That's impressive.
But the series only counts as one. So it's kind of the thing. I don't know how to do anything else, and I kind of eat, breathe, and live movies.
So Plan 9 was really what kind of brought you a lot of attention.
Sure. There was a series I did called Skeleton Key, which was kind of a comedy, really raunchy series of movies that definitely built up a fan base. And then that fan base paid for me to do Plan 9 on a much bigger level. They just supported me and invested in me to go to this, take on this big giant of a film, and we did that. And then now there's been a lot more attention from that movie. Absolutely. In fact, tomorrow night I will be in Lexington, Virginia, where they're screening it at a drive-in.
Oh,
Which
wow.
is kind of like it's like a bucket list for me. I'm so excited to do that.
That's huge.
Yeah, it's super, super cool.
Yeah, no, because I loved Plan 9. I mean, I'm a big Ed Wood fan. I guess, ironically, you would call yourself a fan.
Well,
Sure. Well, you could definitely have I'm a big fan of the work that the man did, and maybe not the quality of the films are the best, but the drive that he had is very
oh
inspirational.
yeah, you can definitely sense the passion in whatever he did.
Yeah.
It's just he made a lot of really
Terrible movies.
Yeah.
weird decisions.
Yeah.
Actually, I
Well,
would say.
that's what makes him kind of endearing. Is he had so much enthusiasm and love for filmmaking, and it just so happened that he was so bad at it.
Well,
So
Right.
he made some very memorable movies in that way. I mean, that and like Bride of the Monster is actually my favorite because in my mind that's sort of the purest Ed Wood movie. That's like
Pull the string.
it's the perfect expression of everything that he loved as a passion project. So
Mm-hmm.
and you've got the incomparable Bela Lugosi giving probably one of the last great performances of his career, which,
Sure.
it sounds funny, but it's true if you watch it, especially that one scene where he does the monologue with the other actor, the hunter, the guy that comes to visit him. There's really still some greatness there, and you kind of realize, this is still Bela Lugosi, and he still had it,
Typecast or not, he was still a great actor.
to the end, and he really brought something.
Yeah, typecast. Because sadly both got him a lot of love and a lot of grief in his life.
It's like most great actors that get associated with one particular part. Anthony Perkins, Norman Bates was kind of a a source of fame, but also kind of an anchor around his neck for, most of the rest of his career. He never really stopped being Norman Bates after Psycho.
Sure.
So with Seventh Guest, getting back to the series, how did you try to incorporate the puzzle elements at all? I mean,
Absolutely.
It just seems like. Go ahead.
Well, the hardest part is that the genre of video game movies has not been great to society.
No,
And
it's
most
just
people they're not big fans of it, so I wanted to make sure I did the best job I possibly could with incorporating as much as I possibly could. So even some of the puzzles from the game are in the show.
Cool.
Very nice.
So, but I think the biggest problem with video game movies is you get a lot of them where it doesn't seem like they cared about the story to begin with. They didn't care about the video game to begin with.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. The biggest problem with video game movies is you bowl. Am I wrong?
Yeah.
I haven't been in a boxing ring in a long time, so I'm not going to say nothing.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Well, even he apparently has pretty much admitted he did most of those movies because of like this obscure tax loophole
Yeah, the German tax loophole.
Yeah, which is sad. But the other problem with video game movies a lot of times is either A, they don't adapt the right properties. They take a game that is mostly action and doesn't have a lot of a story, and so you're left with, okay,
you have to invent a story.
They have to invent a story to suddenly justify all of this ridiculous stuff. Or do they take a game that maybe does have, a decent story to it, but they ignore it because it would take too much time, so they just throw in something else.
I'm just thinking of like
the ones that are successful
Super
usually.
Mario movie.
Oh, well, that was ridiculous. Yeah.
That's the thing.
It's like why?
Yeah.
It's simple
If you actually
story.
respect the source material, usually it comes out a little better.
I think it's also the.
I think that movies that are like made by a filmmaker who has a passion for the story versus a studio who's just trying to make money, you're always going to end up with a better film.
Yeah,
no
exactly.
And video game movies are usually always studio films and not like a passion project. So hopefully that we might be able to turn the tide a little bit in the favor of video game movies for the future, hopefully.
Someday there will be that artistic remake of Street Fighter that I have been like
hoping for.
Yeah.
I was gonna say,
You never know.
I think doing the TV series is a really strong way to do it.
Yes.
Because Seventh Guest has such an intricate storyline. I mean, he couldn't. I think if he had done it as a movie, it wouldn't have worked as well.
Yeah.
The creator Rob Landros and I kind of agreed on that, where we thought that one of the biggest things about Seventh Guest is the atmosphere of the game that you're playing, because most of the time you're just sitting there waiting for something to happen or figuring out a puzzle. It's not like in-your-face action.
Yeah.
It's very atmospheric.
Yeah.
And
the freaky ghosts going down the hallway.
Right. So we wanted to kind of capture that, and we thought if you did it as a feature, it would be very rushed.
Yeah.
And also made to be bigger than it needs to be so far as the story is concerned.
Yeah, I think
like you don't need a big explosion or anything like that, but a lot of movies kind of need that.
I think that's smart.
But good horror is like you're saying. Good horror depends on the atmosphere.
Well, the series kind of almost forces you to be character oriented and to really focus on the story, because you can't carry a series with nothing but action and explosions. You can make a 90-minute movie with almost no plot and just run from set piece to set piece, but you can't do that in a TV show if you want people to actually watch it. So that's
absolutely definitely a lot more challenging, and I'm a little nervous, but hopefully people will like it. I'm playing in a lot of people's sandboxes. I grew up as a kid.
Yeah.
When I did Plan 9, I was remaking the worst movie ever made. So there was a lot more leniency.
The bar was a little low.
The bar was as low as it gets. Let's be honest.
I don't know. I think bars can go lower. I've known stuff.
I don't know. Have you ever
stuff where I couldn't even get through the review of it, let alone the actual movie?
I can think of a few really horrible movies that would be considered for the worst.
Oh yeah, I don't think Plan 9 is actually the worst. I think Plan 9 is up there in one of those where it's the worst in the enjoyable way. I mean, there are movies that are just so dull,
can't
Well,
watch
so
I
boring.
myself have made films way worse than Plan 9 from Outer Space.
I'm sure that
But if so many people enjoy the film for whatever reason, then it's not really a failure.
exactly. It's entertaining, which is what a movie is supposed to be.
I mean, it's been almost a century, and we're still talking about it.
Yeah.
That's not a
Right.
failure, in my opinion.
I mean, I just was thinking like, okay, a good chunk of Dark Tower that came out recently, I would say is much worse than Plan 9 from Outer Space, because I wasn't familiar with the series, and going into it, I was actually kind of really bored for most of it, because there was nothing interesting to me going on.
Yeah.
At least Plan 9 from Outer Space, it kept something interesting. Even if it's interesting in what the heck was he smoking?
Right.
Oh, I just love laughing. I just love watching that movie and waiting to see, like, okay, when is one of the set walls gonna fall down? Yeah, I mean, just it's like, I mean, the man was ambitious, but you love it. It's like, oh look, it's supposed to be an airplane cockpit. It's like 2 folding chairs and and a couple of set walls.
I'm slightly embarrassed to admit I've never actually seen Plan 9 from Outer Space.
Oh, I'll show it to you. It's fantastic.
Yeah, we clearly need to fix this. And I want to see
Or
your
Bride of the Monster.
Yeah.
But we could do a double feature. We could watch the original and then the remake.
That sounds like a good night.
Get the popcorn ready.
Yeah, I was going to say, we need to see his as well.
He's also never seen Night of the Lepus, which to me is another
Oh yeah, it's a classic.
unknown classic. Yeah, that one. I mean, you can't do better than, like, you got Dr. McCoy and Janet Leigh fighting giant killer rabbits. I mean, it's the best movie.
I'm sure there's like a rip track version of it too, if you want.
There's gotta be.
There better be. I mean, that movie was made.
I'm sure there is.
I do want to do a quick.
It's that good.
There's a lot of really.
Our studio person is looking at me like incredulously as I'm describing this movie. I'm like, yeah, it actually exists.
Uh,
Why was I not informed of this?
Oh, I'll show it to you too. We'll do a screening sometime.
We'll all do a movie night, okay?
It's really kind of amazing what kind of movies will get made. Hey, like another one I was thinking of, like it's actually entertainingly bad. It is this indie film called Bear, just simply Bear, from I think it's 2010. Yeah, 2010. And oh my gosh, it's so terrible. It's practically on like that level with it. Is how badly it was produced.
Oh, nice.
No.
So
1 second.
So Jim, what are some of your
Knows.
favorite? What are some of your favorite bad movies? Oh, sorry.
No, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but we're coming up on the 7 o'clock mark,
Oh.
so I thought this would be a good time to mention the call-in number
Yes.
and the Patreon link. So, folks, if you want to call in, 609-807-2492, 609-807-2492. Also, if you're enjoying what we're doing and you want to help us out a bit, we could use your support on our Patreon link, which should be on the screen. That's patreon.com/paranormal encyclopedia. Please, if you can afford to, give us a hand. The show, radio isn't cheap, is what it comes down to. Even if, we get a lot of listeners, even if people do $1 a month, enough of you get together, it equals quite a lot. And you can also do advertising through the show if you're interested in that. And all that information is at patreon.com/demonology. Again, the link's at the bottom of the screen. Okay, so Brian, I believe you asked John, what's your favorite bad movies?
What are some of them?
Yeah,
My
there's-
favorite bad movies.
Or movies that
Well,
inspired
it's
you or
hard to
whatever.
say because I don't want to classify a movie as bad.
Well, what's your
But,
favorite
like-
movie?
Okay, or movies that inspired you.
That's probably a better question.
Yeah, that's
Oh, okay.
safer.
Well, Ridley Scott's Legend is my absolute favorite film of all time.
Oh wow.
Classic.
Followed by Sam Raimi's Evil Dead 2.
Yes!
And
I'm
my
ashamed that I
favorite
still
horror
haven't
movie of
seen
all
them.
time is Tom Holland's Fright Night.
Yes, I love that one.
Oh, what a classic.
The original. No
Yeah,
substitutions.
Yeah,
I
the Tom
enjoyed the
Holland
sequel, but the original is
I did not.
Classic.
I did not like the remake.
I like the Doctor as a Vampire Hunter. That's 90% of the reason I like the sequel.
Yeah, well, yeah, but as far as a story and a remake.
Oh no, it wasn't a great story or anything, but David Tennant as a Vampire Hunter was fun.
Well, sure. I also liked seeing Chris Sarandon pop up in the sort of cameo that he got, but still it didn't make up the movie being terrible.
I think if it wasn't called Fright Night, it would have been a much better movie.
I have to agree.
Yeah, there's a lot of movies like that. It's like, if you just made it your own thing, it wouldn't be nearly as bad.
Yeah, it's
especially even just stripping the name off. Just call it something new. Leave the things in as an homage to the original.
Yeah. Or call it a sequel or something.
Of course, you could do the sequel because
Friday Night 3. They could have called it.
This just makes me think. They did a sequel to the remake of Fright Night.
Yep.
And all they did was change the names and set it in another country. That's exactly the same story.
It's ridiculous. So now we have 3
It was kind of like there were 2 remakes. I don't think that it's very strange because they obviously have nothing to do with each other at all.
Yeah.
They are both a remake of the first film, which is just weird. There was just like a foreign version of it.
Well, it was like the Howling movies. After a while, they stopped being about anything having to do with the original, and they just became this anthology series where they would take some, unknown script about a werewolf, slap the title Howling, 7 or 8 or 9 or whatever on it, and just put it out. It got to be sad.
Yeah, no, that's
I want to make a Howling movie one day.
I've always thought, out of all of the movies that get remade, I think The Howling could actually have a good remake, because you could imagine if you took really the same story but just did it with today's special effects, how incredibly awesome that movie could be.
I don't know.
If they kept it dark, if they didn't make it for teenagers, I think it would be really solid.
Yeah. See, that's my fear, because the original is a great movie.
Yeah.
But it would be so easy to screw that up as a remake.
Yeah, see, I would just take the same script and the same characters,
which they wouldn't do.
But this is if I got the chance to do it, I would basically just make the same movie with better special effects. And
well, there you go, John. If you ever get a chance to do a Howling movie, try and do the remake of the original and just stick to the script.
I would not want to be in the remake position. I'd like to do Howling 9 because I'd be the only person on the planet making Howling 9.
You have a point, and you could do a good one. That would be the...
it could still be a good movie, but if you have a remake, as I've learned through Plan 9 and Seventh Guest, which isn't exactly a remake, but when you're dealing in other people's dreams and their childhood, there's a lot more pressure on what you do. But if you're making a sequel to something, they kind of let you have a little bit more freedom.
True.
That is true. I mean, you could get your own script and then just do, anything. But it'd be nice to see some good werewolf movies.
I agree.
They seem to be more rare than... good vampire movies are still few and far between.
So at least they're there.
But good werewolf movies, it's kind of like you have to wait maybe one every 20 years.
Lightning strike
kind
of situation.
Really good werewolf movie.
What you said?
They're so expensive that for the monster effects, I think that's why they're hesitant about making them.
Yeah.
And just when they make them, they're also usually very bad anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
And that just makes me sad, because there are ways of doing it less expensive. You look at the Underworld movies, and they came up with a technique with the computers and with the stilts and stuff of making pretty effective werewolves.
Though it's not hard. The downside is I'd like to see a good werewolf horror movie. And while Underworld's a lot of fun, it is not a horror.
Oh, no. There's a movie called Howl that was supposed to be really good. I haven't watched it yet, but it's a British werewolf
It's
movie.
okay. It's a decent film.
Yeah, and definitely more of a on the horror side.
Very much.
So, just for fun, I was looking up on Amazon to see how much a copy of Bear was. Apparently, they made a Tommy Wiseau movie.
Huh?
The Room.
The Room?
The guy who directed The Room.
Oh, he's the one who made it?
No, it's about him.
Oh, yeah, the James Franco. I can't remember what it's called, but I saw a preview for it where it's the making of the guy who made The Room, essentially.
Yeah,
Oh,
Tom.
Lord.
yeah, which is
Not a well-loved movie.
that is just scary.
It is the best troll movie.
The best troll movie?
Troll movie.
I haven't subjected myself to it. I know so many people who are, but believe it or not, I'm not a big fan of bad movies.
No, you have to have the right atmosphere. It's like it's one of those things. If it's kind of late at night and you're all sort of punchy and you get a bunch of friends.
Even then, I don't like that. I'm not
Okay.
usually a fan of the B movie. I mean, there are movies certainly that fall into that category I enjoy. I mean, in a number of ways, the Evil Dead franchise, the original Evil Dead franchise, was kind of the B. It was an homage to the B movie.
Well, the first movie was totally a B. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a student film that got turned into
Yeah.
a
Cult classic.
into a theatrical movie, but just barely.
And I absolutely adore that series of movies.
Yeah.
I need to go back and catch up on the TV series.
Oh, that series is fun.
I've watched a bunch of it and I love it and it's fun. I just felt too busy, too many things going on.
Waiting for the third season to come out.
Now I'm just remembering a really, really bad movie that I should not mention it because it involves something doing something else.
That was vague.
It's intentionally vague because if I actually said it would be like, I'm just going to encourage people to find it and they're going to regret it.
Then maybe we should leave it at that.
Yes.
Well, I think one of the advantages, and it's certainly an advantage with the Seventh Guest, though granted I don't know how special effects heavy you've gotten, with the kind of ghost genre, there's a lot you could do, especially making a good atmospheric type of movie, which a haunted house should be, in my opinion, without spending a fortune on special effects.
Oh yeah.
Well, we stayed very practical because my wife does makeup effects,
Oh, nice.
and so we definitely lean towards practical. There are some CG elements, I will say, but not. It's not a heavy contributor. If you see Plan 9, you'll kind of get what I'm talking about.
Okay. So I'm curious. So, I mean, you set up a different sort of setting again, working from the trailer, because it's the only thing I've seen, with this insane asylum. Is the cast going to wind up in some version of the house at some point?
Well, at the end of the second game, the house is destroyed.
True.
But the land is still there, and certain things were built on the land that carries what the house was.
Well, yeah, it's the cursed ground concept. I'm just wondering, because you never know. Sometimes you get that, the house reappears, time warp thing going.
Or maybe
Oh,
they
sure.
could have a flashback to the
Or
30s.
flashbacks.
Oh, well, no, there are flashbacks. There are that. But we don't actually go into the mansion itself
Okay.
in the series. We're on the land of where the mansion was.
Okay. I can understand that. I'm not saying it's a bad choice. I am slightly. It's like, man, I sort of would like to see the old house for old time's sake.
Oh, sure. Now, if we get a second season,
There you go. Something.
Then
it
we're
definitely
different.
leans itself towards that. Because the show, it takes place in an abandoned prison and an asylum where that was built after the house was destroyed.
Oh, yeah, great choices of things to build on top of that property.
Like, we're already screwed. We might as well.
I've had experiences in both haunted prisons and haunted asylums as it is. Up to and including, demonic experiences. And as you say, Stoff is a very Faustian character.
Oh, very much so.
Here's an idea for you. You could. I'm just throwing this out for free and just for giggles. But if you want, you could do like little webisodes, like little tie-in things, just for fun to go back and like show the real estate agent and how he managed to convince like somebody to build on the land. Just little fill in the gaps. I always love to see that kind of stuff. It's like,
Those would be cute.
well, I'm
It
one
seems
of
like
those.
a decent promo type of thing.
Yeah, well, and also web episodes are actually a legit thing with a lot of series now, where you get that extra content, you get people to go to the website. But I've always loved stuff like that. Like I like little silly concepts that pop up in my head, like when you're sitting there, like the original concept of Powerless, where it's like the insurance company that has to
The
clean
insurance
up
company in
make
the world of superheroes.
in the world of superheroes, and I could just see like the same thing, like just little things like from horror movies, the things you don't expect, like okay, after all the horror and the monster has gone through, you got the claims agent out there trying to like figure out, okay, well, all right, so you say the monster smashed the car window in. Now, would you classify that as before or after? Like, was he provoked in some way? Was that like, does this classify as natural damage or a person damage?
See, I'm thinking of ways to play it straight.
I always go into comedy.
Because I was thinking about like a folklorist talking about what happened in the house.
Yes. You can do both.
Well, great minds, because for Plan 9, there's Criswell Predicts, which is how even the original film opens with Criswell predicting the movie.
Yes,
we actually shot
him.
58 episodes of a series called Criswell Predicts.
Oh, I need to find
on the
that.
website that leads up to the movie itself.
Yes, I need to find that because I love that. Like I love the Tim Burton Ed Wood movie.
Sure.
So much, and like I said, Criswell was just hilarious.
I'm still surprised though that his first wife did not like that movie. But upon hearing that, no, she was actually a little worse than seen in the movie. It suddenly makes sense.
Well, yeah, she was not that favorably portrayed, so I can imagine she
No,
was.
I disagree. I personally saw her as just somebody who could not take any more of the empty promises, the parading their dirty laundry around. Just somebody who finally had enough of what can really grate on somebody after a while with a carefree attitude.
Well, sure, but in the context of the movie, she was kind of a wet blanket. So I can imagine where you wouldn't be a fan of that movie if you were going to be portrayed in that way.
Again, I disagree just because I can see where somebody would get frustrated dealing with him.
Do I really have a face like a horse? That was like one of my favorite lines, just because I've heard people say that about Sarah Jessica Parker, like for real, and the fact that I had to give her props. The fact that she had no problem doing that line, and they put that line in there. It's almost like a little in joke, and it's hilarious.
I'm actually curious if you're familiar with a Japanese B movie that turned into a video game called Sweet Home.
I am not.
That's a shame because I constantly think, this is kind of due for a remake, and there's a lot that you can keep basic, but also add on to it.
It's an interesting concept of a group of art restorers in a haunted mansion, if memory serves.
One's an art restorer, and they're basically there to document the life of this artist. And as they're digging through, they're finding something happened that made them go happy, 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 depressed, poor.
Nice.
Yeah, I've seen a bit. I haven't seen the whole movie. I've seen some of it. I've played the video game, which is it's an interesting experience doing the way that they chose to adapt it. I will mention it as well, since we're talking about it as well as talking about the TV series. Anybody who's interested in the video game Seventh Guest, it is available on Good Old Games, and I believe it's available on Steam as well.
Oh, nice.
Yes, they also got a Kickstarter launched while we were shooting the series for a board game.
Ah, yes, I was going to mention that.
Which was successful, and I think the game launches next year, in and around the same time as the show. So it's kind of going to be a Seventh Guest revival next year.
Kind of like a slightly darker Clue, huh?
Yeah, a little bit.
I'm just picturing like a Seventh Guest board game, and I'm like, yeah, it would kind of play like Clue meets, like.
I'm just seeing it as you're going around trying to basically kill everybody before they kill you.
Well, exactly.
It's like it's reverse Clue.
It's a little darker, a little bit darker.
But no, I remember when I first found your series, because it started by looking I was bored and I just bought the Seventh Guest off of Good Old Games. So it's like, I wonder what else is going on with this property because I had heard a while back about them trying to do the video games. So I'm searching the internet and it's like, oh, the video game failed and they tried it again and it failed. That sucks. Oh, wait, somebody's doing a board game and somebody's doing a TV series. Which is what
it was kind of, we weren't ready to let it, Soft was not ready to die yet.
Nice.
Well, great villains never die.
No.
No.
So, are you? Do you have any other like projects in the works or on the back burner for post?
Sure, I'm shooting 4 features next year.
Wow. Okay. Do nothing by halves, huh?
In March, we're finishing up a sci-fi horror film about time travel called Rifters. Then we're doing a slasher film for Amazon Prime.
Okay.
Then I'm doing the biggest budget movie I've ever done called Spook House, which is about a fun house that comes to life. And then we're doing a Christmas horror musical called Xmas.
We'll have to keep an eye out for those. Those sound very cool.
Yeah, the spooky, the funhouse coming to life I particularly approve of. It's like, yeah, this just appeals to me. They all sound really cool. Being a
well, yeah, you can follow that at darkstone-ent.com is our website where everything is connected there, as well as the previous 171 films I've made that I will allow people to watch. The first 50 I do montages, but you have to start somewhere.
Nice.
We all have that.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone in any kind of art. I mean, writers I know from having dabbled in writing.
I've got a couple of short stories that I wouldn't show anybody anymore.
You know, my early days of radio worked so bad because I had my co-host was much more experienced than I am. But I know I stumbled through a lot of it back in the day, and it's amusing because a few of them are on YouTube and places like that. To listen to me way back when and to think about where I've come.
Sure.
Yeah, we'll post a link to your site on.
Yes, of course.
On like the channel and Facebook.
Oh well,
page.
thank you so much.
Of course, this is a great project. I'm hyper excited. I think our listeners are. I can't be the only fan of this video game series out there listening to this. I'm sure that they're going to
clearly not if
check
they
this
got
out.
if they got a Kickstarter for the for a board game done.
Could you give us that link again, by the way?
Please do.
It's Darkstone, DARKSTONE-ENT.com.
ENT or EMT?
ENT as in entertainment.
Okay.
They're always good to clarify that for the listener because
as opposed to emergency medical technician.
Yeah.
I mean, I know from in the past we've had listeners from other countries and things of that nature. So it's like, you want to make sure they get the spelling right, or they wind up looking at German pornography or something, and it's like, oh, that's not what I meant. But I'm here.
Funny how often it happens.
There was actually one time I was working in a call center, and I almost transferred a person to a sex phone line. It's like, it's a good thing I waited a few seconds to listen to that before I did it.
I remember working in a hotel as a manager and having a friend of mine who worked there. He worked overnight, and people who work overnight are generally very strange people. I work a lot of overnight, so I know from firsthand experience. But he'd look up weird things on his shift, including like poisonous snakes. So at one point, he was looking up black mamba, which is a very venomous snake.
Yes.
But it turns out if you alter the spelling slightly, if you go to blackmamba.com, I'm not suggesting anyone do this if you do, but you wind up on a porn site.
It's not surprising. Just about everything has a.
Yeah, it got awkward when he left it open, and one of the women
bad.
working there saw it. Like, oh.
Yeah, you don't do that.
It's like, you didn't. It's an understandable mistake, but really, dude? Really? So you've got 4 movies coming out this next year. Do you have an approximate date on Seventh Guest yet for anybody who's interested?
Well, the pilot will be touring as of January to conventions, but we haven't announced which ones we're going to yet. So just the first episode will kind of get pimped out a lot throughout the year. And then the whole series should be done because it's all shot, it's all in the can, it's all in editing now. It should be done in summer, and then we're going to take it to market. So it's hard to say when, but if you keep up with the Seventh Guest site, we'll announce the conventions that the pilot's playing at if you want to come out and see it in the theater.
We'll have to look around and see if there's anything near us.
Yeah.
Yeah, your Jersey?
Yes.
Is that what the New Jersey Horror Con?
Oh.
I just went this year, and I'm planning on going back again next year. And they've got a screening room, and we will probably be screening the Seventh Guest pilot at that convention.
Oh, nice.
And Gene, that's the one that Yeah,
We
the
might
station
be there.
has a connection with them. We're talking about possibly being there ourselves.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
Yeah, super nice guys.
I was just thinking, for that matter, we have a friend who runs a couple of conventions up here who might be interested as well.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, great! Yeah, send them our way. We're looking for basically taking around and screening a bunch of places throughout the year.
Yeah, they got a friend of mine, Jeff Mock. He runs an event called Wicked Fair. He runs an event called Dark Side of the Con. He also runs the largest steampunk convention in the world up here in Jersey.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. Also, DexCon, because it's a gaming convention, and this has that gaming connection.
Maybe
Might
we
be,
could talk to
might be
Vinny.
some fans for that too.
We are going to be, when we reach out for touring, we are going to be reaching out to video game conventions as well, because obviously it's
Too many
a
games.
groundbreaking video game.
Well, this is general gaming.
Yeah, this
but-
is more of a board role playing, but they
But
do
it's
some
everything.
video
They
games.
have a lot of-
well, now we've got a board game.
Yeah, they have
Yeah.
a lot of video games, so they'd probably be really happy too.
I've got your email, and I'll poke some people and see what we can set up for you. Because
Thank
I want
you
to
so
see.
much. That'd be great.
I want to see. I want to see this, and I think the easiest way for me to see this is to make sure it's what conventions I'm going to be at.
Yeah, for
Why not?
now. But eventually it'll get released worldwide. I
There we
imagine.
go.
I know, but I'm also a fan of supporting things I like, and this is a way. One of the cheapest ways I can do it is just put people in touch with each other.
Yes.
Oh, well, thank you so much. That'd be excellent.
Do you have any? I think we're probably getting. I mean, we're getting on to 7:30.
Yeah.
Do you have any last things you'd like to fill our listeners in, or questions for us?
No, well, I guess we got it. Darkstone-ENT.com. Plan 9, numeral9.com. Also, Plan 9 is available at every Walmart in the country, as well as Amazon Prime.
We have Prime, so we can watch this.
I don't know, keep watching movies.
We will.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is probably a good point to wrap the interview, and then we'll wind up chatting for a while, as is our habit. John, I
Thank
want
you
to
so much for having me.
thank you for coming on. You've been a great guest, and
Yes.
I will be in touch
If
once
not
I get a hold of the
seventh
people
guest.
I know. You're our honorary 7th guest. To be thematic.
We're just going to call you our 7th guest, even if it's not correct.
No, I think it's legitimate because first episode was the 2 of us, so that's 2, and
That's
3,
true,
and then
yeah.
4 guests.
We could make
we can
it
snaggle the
work.
number because you are
We
the
can-
We can
the
finish
number.
it on the 7th test.
Yeah,
Perfect.
we'll make it work.
Punch the number, the massage, and
Yeah.
It's radio. It's all about fudging things a little bit, make it fit. But again, thank you, John. Have a great night.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, everyone, that was John Johnson again from Darkstone Entertainment, the creator of the upcoming TV series The 7th Guest, along with a slew of other movies.
Yeah.
Um,
I can't believe he's made like 100+ films. That's
I know.
amazing.
I would recommend that everybody check that out. Since we're moving into we're going to just go on random tangents time of the show, I want to give out the phone number again. It should also be on the screen, I believe. It's 609-807-2492.
I'll be right back.
609-807-2492. Keep in mind as well that we do have a chat room at Hamilton Radio. You can hop in there and say hello if you're a little too shy to come on the phone lines. I am there under the name Paranormal Encyclopedia. So where should we go from here?
I don't know, because now I'm just thinking about a whole bunch of B horror films that we just love. One I haven't seen in a while, I should probably see again, and is another Japanese cult classic called Suicide Club.
I've heard of that one. I haven't seen it.
It's a bit weird just because it takes a lot of psychological approaches. It's like, are you connected with yourself? Even if you're gone and the people are still connected to you, but are you connected to yourself?
Well, I think maybe that's an interesting enough topic, even we're getting on towards Halloween. Horror movies.
Mm.
I think if nothing else, maybe people would be interested to talk about my favorite versus least favorite of the ghost hunter genre of movies that have become the thing. I mean, let's face it, the whole paranormal genre has been going on back and forth for decades. I mean, you can go back to the original black and whites with the haunting of the house on Haunted Hill, the original 13 Ghosts. For that matter, you have one of the great classics of the genre, The Haunting of Hill House. Modern movies, The Conjuring, Second Conjuring, the Annabelle movie, which those of you who can't see, I just face palmed. So welcome back, Brian. We've decided for the moment, the best topic we can all think of is horror movies. So I'm going through my good, the bad, and the ugly of paranormal horror.
Oh, sure.
I would say of the recent horror movies I've seen, and for the record, I am neither a fan of the slasher subgenre nor of the zombie subgenre.
No, neither.
I mean, I respect people who are, it's cool and all, but zombie movies for me are very predictable. For one, and for the other, the issue I have is being a demonologist and being a folklore buff. I like things that are based in folklore. I don't necessarily object when they're not, and when people, like Brian goes in some unique directions. That's not a bad thing, but your vampires still have elements that are reminiscent of the mythology. You did your homework.
Yeah.
When you look at the zombie genre, those aren't zombies.
Well, there's a difference, I think, between knowing what the tradition or the folklore is and deciding, making a conscious decision to go in a different direction. That's one thing, but just being, a lot of times it's when people are just ignorant of the original stuff, and all they base their ideas on is what other people have done in movies and stuff. No.
Anne Rice has openly admitted she did not care in the least for the folklore.
No, and that's fine, and I get that, but at the very same time, she still had, I mean, whether it was accidental or not, she still managed to get a lot of folklore and kind of.
I think 90% of it was accidentally, in that she was copying the folklore from Bram Stoker and then changing things to make her vampires natural.
Well, she had her own idea of how she wanted her vampires to be, and then eventually she built a mythology around that and kind of created probably the most, since Bram Stoker, the most substantial new version of a vampire that...
as much as I loathe Anne Rice, I can't deny she's a very important figure in the history of vampire genre, whether I like her or not. And if anyone can't tell by now, I really don't like Anne Rice.
No, but
I hate Stephanie Meyer more, but I don't like Anne Rice either.
But she really did bring back kind of the Byronic, vampire, almost as a tragic hero rather than the Bram Stoker pretty much owned from his publication of Dracula up through this mid-century.
We've discussed this before in our vampire panel, but that's the point where vampires started to become the hero of the story rather than the thing that everybody's against.
But realistically, and we've talked about this as well, the idea of the vampire as at least a tragic figure isn't new.
Oh no, it's not new, but she was responsible for kind of bringing it back.
I would say she popularized.
Yeah.
Because
it existed here and there before her, but Stoker's version really kind of overwhelmed everything
a satanic archetype villain. Yeah. It's worth noting, I'm a huge fan of the novel Dracula.
I am not. I respect it, but it's, in my opinion, it's a very poorly constructed novel.
And I don't agree in the
it's
slightest.
got a lot of flaws, which is
Hence why
it's-
we're doing the Dracula versus
Yes.
Lestat argument.
That'll be watch that for Halloween. That'll be fantastic.
The thing
I'm
is,
gonna get a wig and everything too.
and I'm getting a cape.
Yes, he's gonna have a cape.
But when you look at the history of vampire folklore, or vampire fiction, I should say, more than vampire folklore, there are two important books that came out before Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, there's at least three, but the very first book that hit the English language about vampires was actually a book of the folklore written by somebody who believed in vampires.
Yeah.
The problem with Stoker, though, is that he actually had no idea what he was doing, and he was just a filthy, sexist pig.
Yep.
Well, I'm not going to disagree with you there.
I don't.
Every time
I-
there's a female vampire, she suddenly voluptuous, like suddenly her
She goes into sex kid.
and it's like that's not how this works. That is not how any of this
Well,
works.
there was a
but
great
then
deal.
Into the themes that he was trying to play with
There was a great
that
deal of
era's
Victorian
ideas of
sexual-
sexuality.
Yes.
And granted, though, why can I not remember her name? The main female
Mina?
does have a lot of positive characteristics. She says that she's
But she
very
does also
scientifically
become much more
minded.
sexualized once
Well,
once
and-
she gets Dracula's blood.
Sure.
She also
Which
becomes
is a
more of a damsel in distress.
This
Which
is
is more of a product of the Victorian era than Bram Stoker himself. If it's no.
and it's kind of, I think, the theme he's working with to some extent is Victorians on the surface, and as we remember them historically, are very sexually oppressed, which is not actually factually true.
No.
Everyone talks about Queen Victoria herself saying, her advice to married women was to lie back and think of England. This woman had multiple lovers. She was not into the whole. She was not the prude that she's been turned into by any means.
And the Victorians had a very thriving underground sort of BDSM.
Prostitution was at its highest point in the
cultures.
Victorian period.
Yeah, the more proper things looked on the surface, the more was going on
Which-
behind the scenes.
But that's
Yeah.
kind of what Dracula was, I think, tapping into, is
A
that
little
by
bit.
becoming a vampire, getting the vampire blood, they're given the permission to open up their sexuality. And granted, he's making that as a horrible thing.
Well, also there's a certain metaphor going on for Dracula being a filthy, dirty foreigner coming over and infecting the purity and virtue of English women, which
And
that's
that was
another.
wrong.
Along with
Yeah.
being sexist, there's a good undercurrent of
Of
racism in
But
Dracula
he's also his
too.
own Mary Sue, if you think about it. Because Abraham Van Helsing was essentially supposed to be him.
Yeah, this is true.
So the whole he pulls essentially a Hitler speech move with how he rabbles the boys up, or like a crusade. So it's nothing more than him wanting to be the hero, but nobody wants to listen. So that's how he got it out.
And what were you trying to say?
Yes.
I was more thinking with the whole underground versus what's over on the surface with the classic Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which was the entire point of
Oh,
this.
that's another
That's a
prime
whole-
example.
Which is
Yeah.
also based on an actual serial killer,
Yeah.
by the way, I believe his name was Robert Moody. I know the first name was an R, and the last name is definitely Moody. I don't remember for certain the first name. He was a Scottish serial killer.
Nice.
But again, yes, Jekyll, because technically it's Jekyll in Hyde. Jekyll's a mispronunciation.
But nobody wants to pronounce it that way because that sounds terrible.
It taps into the same sort of mindset.
Dr. Jekyll!
It's interesting, at least in my opinion, that there are a couple. I mean, everybody thinks of Dracula as the first vampire novel. It isn't.
No, not by a long shot.
There are. I was wrong earlier because there are 3 important fictional novels before it.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have Camilla,
Yep.
which was written by Fanu,
Yep.
and this is the one.
Another Irishman, by the way. All the best vampire novels were written by Irishmen.
or according to him, at least, by women from New Orleans.
No, I'll still stick by it.
You like Anne Rice.
I like Anne Rice and I admire what she did, but I will also I am free to give criticism. Interview with the Vampire as a novel is kind of clunky and not. She gets much better by the time she gets to Vampire Lestat.
That's what I was just having somebody say. Lestat was like the worst book of the series,
No,
or at least the early series.
not as far as writing. It depends on what you're judging them on. By pure story, maybe Interview is a deeper story.
I hate them all. So.
But Lestat is much more cleanly written. It's got a stronger narrative voice, and it flows a lot better. It's got a much better pacing. Interview with the Vampire kind of lurches around, sort of like, you know, like Dracula. Dracula's got a fantastic opening. All the stuff with Stoker at Dracula's castle is great.
Harker, not Stoker's the author.
Stoker, yeah. Harker. Dracula.
And you're supposed to be our resident vampire expert, I might
I
add.
am. It's a slip of it. It was a Freudian slip. But that first part of Dracula is fantastic, and even in the movies, that's usually the best part.
Right.
And then it goes to England, and it's like
It almost shifts to another story because
it turns into like this dry procedural for like, you know, for like
it is sort of a Victorian detective mystery.
yeah,
In the second half.
I mean, Dracula is like nowhere to be seen. There's like he's off in the day, maybe doing stuff. Occasionally he shows up, and then they go back to the end and finally and tack on this sort of like. That's why I don't think Dracula as a novel is all that great. If you translate it perfectly, it's very uneven.
Mm.
Well, you can have something uneven and still have it be good. I mean, I call Jaws the Tale of Two Movies.
Yes.
And it's a similar situation with it's two very different
Oh,
pacers.
there
Yeah.
are, and the thing is, it's great. It works if both parts work. The problem is the stuff in Dracula in the middle gets really kind of uninteresting for a while and feels kind of like.
I'll agree it has its slow points. I
Like,
still think it's a great novel.
It feels padded. It feels like he's sort of just marking time until he can get back to the real story. But we get to hear about Seward talking about all of his various lunatics and Mina's diary and Lucy and all this stuff that's going on that's really kind of uninteresting until some good stuff starts happening.
What I was going to note about, again, when you look at, Anne Rice popularized ideas that are older than her.
Yes.
So did Stoker. I mean,
yeah.
when you look at what Brian's talking
The
about, which is
vampire.
very true about how Stoker is very much a Eastern corrupting the West. Camilla starts with that idea, is very much into that idea too.
Yes.
Complete with the old guy who knows the folklore who comes around and kills the vampire.
Yes. Oh, there's a
Also, the lesbian overtones start with Camilla.
A little bit, yeah. There were apparently other vampire writers that did that. That French author that I mentioned.
I'm trying to think of the name. There's a poem called Christabel.
Yes, that's a
that plays with it as well.
Keats, I think.
I
Keats
don't. I think it might have been Coleridge. I'm not sure.
Coleridge, Samuel Taylor Coleridge.
Which is the thing. A lot of the Romantic poets played a lot with vampiric imagery.
Oh yeah.
Which gets to the story I wanted to tell in a
There's a
minute.
poem about Lamia.
Yes.
Which, very heavy. Byron himself did.
So going back, another real important. Byron, I want to. There's a
we'll do
progression.
the whole thing on Byron. Okay.
So another real important one of the time period, of course, is Varney the Vampire.
Yes. The original
Freaking chore stopper of a book. You think that Stephen King, the collected Varney, is like
it's
like
something
dictionary
like 2,000. It's like something like 2,000 pages.
I used to have a copy. I used to have a copy. It was Varney. It was a bunch of commentary on it and a number of other gothic short story type things. It was pretty much the size of a full size dictionary.
Well, because it was published as a
Serialized
novel, and it was one of those things where it went on for several years. So he was publishing chapters and stuff for many, many years. It was the equivalent of like modern day soap opera.
And he gives you the first. Pretty much, he's one of the first sympathetic character vampires.
I don't know if he's sympathetic so much as he's tragic and self-loathing. But Varney is not especially sympathetic. I mean, he still is pretty vicious.
So as long as it is my understanding, he goes back. The characterization goes all over the map.
Yes, so it's hard to tell which Varney. But yeah, Varney, as he starts off, is very much the sort of monster. He comes in through the window while the woman is sleeping. He has fangs. He has claws. He has red eyes. He attacks women while they're sleeping and then flies away. the very sort of early
Classic folkloric
classic
vampire
stuff that you would think of with Dracula, but it actually starts with Varney. And then later it starts verging into sort of science fiction where, oh no, he was a guy that, experimented with, this stuff and he got brought back to life with lightning or something, or he was cursed by the devil. Yeah, he's got about 3 or 4 origin stories peppered throughout this day because I think
because it
the
keeps
author,
changing his mind.
I think the author just forgot, the last version he did, just kept
He
making
just
up
made it
new
new.
ones.
It's like, wait, how did you become a vampire? I don't think I did that yet.
Yeah,
Right.
it's like, oh,
6 months later, how did I become a vampire
How did
again?
you become a
I
vampire?
didn't write that yet. New
Hey
version.
guys, where does Nosferatu come in on this? Are you-
The movie Nosferatu specifically?
well, just the character. I mean,
No, actually, Nosferatu, that's funny. Stoker popularized it. It came from a mistranslation or a misunderstanding by a folklorist named Emily Gerard, who wrote a book called Transylvanian Superstitions that Stoker used to do most of his research. Stoker never visited Transylvania or anywhere. He got most of his information from books and from a folklorist friend of his. But yeah, the word Nosferatu actually means something along the lines of plague bearer or plague carrier.
It's like a typhoid Mary.
It's more
figure.
of that. Yeah, it has nothing to do with vampires, but Stoker stuck it in his book and thought that it was a synonym for vampire, which, granted, his version of Dracula, there are a lot of similarities in the symbolism of, you look at like the effects that Dracula has on those he feeds upon. They weaken, they sicken, they die.
It's been suggested it's partly, I don't agree, but it has been suggested Dracula's feeding is partly a symbol for syphilis, which was, of course, a major issue at the time.
It could be that. It could be for any sort of uncleanliness. I mean, I know Stoker was a Catholic and had very very strong feelings about morality and whatnot in that Victorian framework. So
The story of the movie Nosferatu is also kind of interesting.
oh, that's amazing.
What you run into is originally they wanted to make an adaptation of Dracula. Now, Bram Stoker was dead by this point, so they went to his widow who said no. So they decided, we'll just change a couple of details.
Change the name, set it in Germany. Nobody will know the difference.
And yeah, the reality is,
It's a shot-by-shot remake.
what?
It's a shot-by-shot remake.
Not
No,
quite
the
nobody-
original Nosferatu is, it's not the very first movie about Dracula, but it's the first adaptation of the novel.
and actually in some ways improves upon
No, it's an absolutely amazing movie.
the story of the novel. It cuts out a lot of the unnecessary stuff and kind of hits all the dramatic beats because Murnau was a great filmmaker.
But what you run into is Stoker's widow noticed
Oh,
and sued, and they actually ordered every copy of the movie be destroyed.
bankrupted the studio that made it.
Thankfully, it didn't. Obviously, it wasn't completely destroyed.
Yeah.
Fun fact: Max Schreck is the man who plays Counterlock, the vampire in that movie. The word Schreck in German means terror,
Yep.
and it's not a stage name. That's his actual birth
It
name.
was his real name. He was a famous German stage actor at the time.
Look him up. I highly recommend everybody who's seen the movie or even seen the makeup job. Look him up on Google. Look at a picture of him out of makeup. He's a pretty freaking looking dude, all on his own.
Yeah.
There's a reason there's a movie, The Shadow of the Vampire, based on the idea that no, it was an actual vampire.
Which that movie is amazing. If you get a
That
chance.
movie sucks.
No, that movie's awesome.
I fell asleep during it.
Yeah.
It is a bit long and artsy, but I did really enjoy that movie.
There was nothing to it.
No, you're wrong.
If anyone's wondering,
just wrong.
the new voice you're hearing, by the way, is Beth, our new producer.
Hi.
Yes.
She's a good friend of ours, and we decided to invite her to join this crazy roller coaster
Direct
ride.
all your hate mail to her, not to us.
Of course, talking about Nosferatu, it made me think of again how tragic the story of Bela Lugosi was, considering how much he went through to not only get the part, but get that movie made in the first place.
Well, and again, that's another instance where the book Dracula wasn't hugely successful when it was first came out, and it actually hadn't been. I mean, the stage play, the Balderson Dean stage play, actually really brought it back because it wasn't that well known and wasn't like a beloved classic novel. It was really the play, and then later the movie adaptation with Bela Lugosi that kind of brought it to the modern prominence that we now.
Yeah, I'm just thinking again how tragic the whole story is, considering that Dracula kind of hurt his career.
And made his career.
Well, it made his
There's
career.
a whole reason he had a movie career.
I mean,
Granted, he was a very well-established stage actor.
Yes.
And noted. Here's the thing about Bela. Bela was not the original choice to play Dracula.
No, to be fair,
Lon Chaney Sr., the master of makeup.
To be fair, that is like, okay, if you're not going to choose this guy that we now know it to be like one of the greatest of all times, having like somebody who, especially at the time, was even greater.
Well, he was considered like the greatest horror actor of his.
This is actually considered one of the greatest actors in general because he did a number of very respected non-horror movies.
Well, yes, but a lot of it. I mean, most people knew him as
for
like,
the Man of a Thousand Faces,
and just his horror work was incredible.
And if you haven't seen any Lon Chaney, I recommend checking him out. Man was a phenomenal actor, as well as a phenomenal, one of the greatest makeup artists of all time. I mean, he put himself through physical torture to get the makeup he did not.
Yes.
London After Midnight, where he played a vampire. Sadly, the movie doesn't exist anymore, but stills of this vampire with his mouth full of razor-sharp teeth and bulging eyes. Yeah. And keep in mind, he used wires to hold his eyes open wider. That's why that makeup is so terrifying.
Oh, his makeup
he did that
for
Family Opera too.
Yeah.
Yes.
With his nose, and he had so many nosebleeds, he actually had to be hospitalized. I think like maybe 2 or 3 times.
And Quasimodo, I mean, he put himself through
70 pounds on his back.
Yeah, just ridiculous. But in a touch of irony, if you want to see a little bit of what London After Midnight might have been like, I mean, it's different. But Mark of the Vampire with Bela Lugosi is kind of a remake of London After Midnight.
So we'll come back to the story of the making of Dracula because I know Amisha in particular is fond of the story. Or why don't you just say real quick about Bela and what he went through to do the movie?
Okay, so as we stated before, they tried to make the movie Nosferatu to get around the Dracula copyright, and that didn't work. So
and really pissed the widow off.
Yeah, so naturally that made the widow angry. So when the studio came forward saying they wanted to make an actual Dracula movie, she initially said no. Bela Lugosi then took initiative and decided to woo the widow Stoker into letting them make the movie, which he successfully did.
It also helped that it was a movie that was going to be based on the stage play rather than the book, which was different rights. They didn't have to deal with her quite as much.
Fun fact with Bela, when he first came to the United States, because his actual birth name was Bela Blasco. He was born in the town of Lugos, Hungary, which is actually in Transylvania. So that accent he does is an actual legitimate Transylvanian accent. Now, he when he first came to the U.S., he didn't speak English. He only spoke Hungarian. So he wound up learning his lines to play Dracula on the stage phonetically. So when he was first started playing the character, he didn't even know what he was saying. He was just repeating the lines phonetically from what he had learned.
But that charisma of his just went.
Well, yeah. When you look at
came through
the movie, one of the strengths of the movie, and it's partly because of the directors, and it's also very much because of Bela, it's a very quiet movie.
It was something of the time, yeah, but
because it's just coming out of the silent era.
Yeah, it was so they don't have the background music. I mean, if you see the Spanish version,
well, it's not
Dracula,
even just the music.
I really need to see the Spanish version.
We have it on DVD.
Yeah, it's kind of a shame because that movie has a lot more atmosphere and it has a lot more life.
I've been told that the only downside of the Spanish version versus the American version is that the Spanish version doesn't have Bela. That's the only downside of it.
Well, I would also add Dwight Fry in there because Dwight Fry's Renfield is kind of one of a kind, and the Spanish version isn't quite up to par.
I would also point out the
cameras are much better.
When I say that it's a quiet movie, it's not just the lack of music; it's the lack of dialogue. The characters don't talk as much as you'd expect because Todd Browning, the director, came out of the silent film era.
Yeah.
It was directed to be almost a silent movie, and I think it's part of why it works so beautifully.
Yeah.
We need to get back to the story that I want to tell, and you've been alluding to. So the point that the vampire fiction really starts to appear is in the romantic.
Jumping around stories.
Yeah, but that's kind of what we do. But
Yeah, I never finished it on how Bela Lugosi.
oh, sorry. Go ahead, honey.
I don't think any of us have actually finished a story yet, so it's all right.
But real quick, in case you're wondering what we're talking about, when they made a Dracula, they also made a Spanish version for the massive amount of Mexican immigrants they were getting at the time. They weren't paying attention as much to the Spanish version, so they got away with a lot more.
They did. There's a great documentary on the Universal DVD.
But going back to Bela, so he was a widow's Stoker. As we said, he wasn't their first choice to play Dracula.
Lon Chaney died a year before filming.
So now there was this huge debate over who was going to be Dracula now. Bela Lugosi actually took a pay cut in order to get the part.
And had to really audition for it.
And he worked
his rear end off to get it done.
Well, because they thought his accent was going to be a problem. And,
well, were they wrong?
And, well, it was one of those ironic. It's like Arnold Schwarzenegger at first. When he did his first movies, they used to dub him.
Okay.
So, no, I'm just thinking now of Hercules in New York. Oh my gosh, that movie.
We're coming towards the end of our time frame, so I do want to get to the story I want to tell. So, vampires start showing up in fiction first as poetry. The great romantic poets, particularly Lord Byron, who is, of course, one of the greatest poets of the English language. So there's a funny story about that really relates to the birth of the vampire novel. It's the very first one that was ever written. It also relates to another novel that's sort of well known. And this takes place in 1816. 1816...
On a dark and stormy night.
Yes, actually. Those of you who don't know, is also known as the year without a summer, also the poverty year, the summer that never was, the year there was no summer, and 1800 and froze to death. So basically, the world's climate went crazy due to a number of volcanic eruptions that had happened the year before in 1815, particularly the eruption of Mount Tambora in the Dutch East Indies, largest eruption in at least 1,300 years. And possibly also the eruption of Mayon in the Philippines. It basically sent the Earth into a year-long ice age. Now, a quartet of people, Lord Byron, John Polidori, who's very important to this story, of course, and possibly the other great poet of the age, Percy Bysshe Shelley, all decided to get together this summer. Honey, it's a dramatic thing. They decided to
let the man tell his story.
They decided to get together at Lord Byron's estate on Lake Geneva for boating and picnics and all the usual summer things. But there's no summer.
Surfing.
So they're stuck inside the whole time with storms and rain and thunder and lightning. And they're sitting in the library reading a book of ghost stories. I've heard that it was a French book called Phantasmagoria. I've also heard that it was a German book, ghost stories. But they're reading ghost stories, and Lord Byron, being Byron, doesn't think they're very good. So he goes, I have an idea, let's write our own. Now, Lord Byron begins what's known as fragment of a novel. He never finished it, but it's a story about a vampire. His doctor, Polidori, picks up the fragment of the novel and runs with it. Writes the first vampire novel known as The Vampire, where it's Y instead of an I. And the romantic figure, the suave, debonair, handsome vampire is here. Basically, the vampire in the novel is Lord Byron. To the point that because when it was originally published, John Polidori's name wasn't on it, everyone just assumed Byron wrote it.
Yeah, it was published anonymously, and everyone pretty much assumed it was Byron.
Which he quickly corrected.
Except for Byron, who was very pissed off and found the portrayal of Lord Riven rather unflattering.
So, Percy Shelley may have written a couple of poems. If he did anything other than that, I've never found any. I never found a record of it, nor never found anyone who knew. But Percy's girlfriend had a nightmare, and had also visited some rather interesting castles in Germany. So she started a little novel that some of you might have heard of, called Frankenstein. She started writing it at the Lake House. Both Shelley and Byron read early drafts of it. Neither thought it was very good. And it is absolutely remarkable to me that you have a meeting of two of the greatest literary minds of all time, of the age, without question, two of the greatest poets of all time, and neither of them came up with anything. Meanwhile, a doctor came up with the precursor of the vampire genre, and a woman who only ever wrote one other story, which was a post-apocalyptic story, The Last Man on Earth, and otherwise was not a writer. And Last Man on Earth came after Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Frankenstein was the first thing she had ever written. Wrote two of the most important books of the 19th century. Well, the vampire is not, isn't that as important as Frankenstein by any means, but at least for the horror genre, and particularly the vampire genre, is an incredibly important book.
It probably inspired a lot more. It's not as well known today
Yeah.
as it should be, but it probably inspired a lot.
And
of
it is
others.
available out there online for free because it's past the 100-year mark, so it's long past the point of being copyrighted. If you want to check it out,
Interesting story. Also, by the way, if anybody wants to see a somewhat unusual dramatization of the events that Kevin's describing, Ken Russell did a movie called Gothic, which is pretty much about that.
there's a couple
That
of
weekend.
movies based on it.
Okay, the only one I know of was
Yeah, the
Gothic.
most famous is Gothic, which I've seen, which is a weird movie.
It is. It's very strange.
I'm not saying it's a bad movie, but it's a weird
Well,
movie.
it's a Ken Russell. it's gonna be weird.
Yeah, we got to wrap it up soon.
Okay, so that brings us to the end of our show for tonight, everyone. I want to thank you all for tuning in. I want to let everybody know next week we're going to have the folks that wrote the book, The Ghosts of the Captain Ran Inn, which is a famous inn in Connecticut that's haunted. Also, if you're available, I'm going to be speaking at Halloween in the Catskills all this weekend. We leave early tomorrow morning. It's a great event. Come check it out. And then I'll be there. Brian and I will both be there next weekend.
Yes, this weekend I'll be at the Indie Author Day in Vineland, New Jersey, and also the River Reads, which is up in Stockton, New Jersey.
And last thing before we go, please, again, if you got a couple of bucks to spare, please go to patreon.com/demonology. That's patreon.com/demonology. Links in the bottom of your screen. We could definitely use your support.
Yes.
But that's it for tonight, everyone. I want to thank you for tuning in. This is Kevin.
This is Misha.
And Brian.
Saying have a great night.
So you guys are clear.
Yay. 5 down.
Good show, guys.
Thank you.